These are stories read by visualbrony, who is on his 5-year mission to find amazing stories, discover strange crossovers, and read tales that no one has read before. The Twilight Enigma, Chapter 5, A Tight Squeeze, in which Twilight makes several poor decisions while not in full possession of her faculties, and takes a rather large risk based solely on a teeniest connection between appearance and appellation. May 3rd, 1014, afternoon. On board Nebula, approaching and within the dragon thief's range.
No!
I yelled.
No shooting!
Rainbow Dash stopped trying to fit a quarrel into the crossbow and stared at me in disbelief.
Twilight, if they catch us, they're going to kill us!
The energy it took to stomp my hoof on the deck made my head swim.
Unless you can take out an entire airship with that thing, put it down! Those zebras aren't bad ponies. They're just defending their sultan against pirates. Well, defending his property anyway. We're in this mess because we're trying to save lives.
And we're gonna fail us out in a right unpleasant way if they don't catch us. Applejack shot back. Rainbow glared at me and dropped the quarrel into the slot on top of the crossbow. Then she raised the stock to her cheek, squinted along it, and fired.
Rainbow!
She scowled at me and jerked her head towards the closest airship. I turned to look and saw that she'd hit its steering fin. She had used one of those quarrels with the crescent-shaped cutting heads, and the fabric between two of the fin's spines had been sliced apart from end to end.
Alright, sorry, please continue.
I was exhausted and not thinking clearly. Far from helping the situation, I was actively distracting from our defense. I'd have done better to just collapse against the stern rail and provide some cover, or...
Cat! Yes, Captain?
The changeling hissed around the grip in the short serrated blade in her mouth.
Go to my cabin and get the small black box that's in the locked cabinet over my bunk.
I pulled the cabinet's key out of my vest and dropped my head to let the chain slide off my neck.
The one you told me never to touch under any circumstances? That's the one! Hurry!
She sheathed her blade, scooped up the key, and vaulted over the quarterdeck rail to the waist of the ship. In under a minute, Rainbow Dash managed to shred most of the nearest pursuer's forward steering fin on her starboard side. The ship's crew had shifted her course to protect that side, but were slowing because of the damage. I was impressed. Unfortunately, I wasn't the only one who was impressed. The attack ship's captain had taken Dash's actions personally and had launched a squad of 4 Pegasi, armed with bows, to get rid of the threat to his vessel. They climbed as they raced towards Nebula, to make it hard for us to return fire, and when they had gotten within range, they began doing their best to turn Rainbow Dash into a pincushion. Believe it or not, Rainbow was fast enough to dodge arrows. If they came one at a time, that is. The third arrow cut her left wing, missing the flesh, but chopping at least a half dozen of her primary feathers in half. Rarity cut the fourth arrow from the air before it could lodge in Dash's chest.
Get under cover, you idiot!
Applejack yelled at Dash.
It's yours they're aiming for!
Hide? Are you kidding?
Another volley arrived. One crescent-headed arrow thudded into the deck between Rainbow Dash's forehoofs, and another clipping even more feathers from her ruined wing.
Yikes!
Her sense of self-preservation finally kicked in and she dove behind the binnacle. One of the archers unwisely got within the range of Rarity's magic and paid the price. She wasn't magically strong enough to pull a pony out of the air, but she didn't need to be. The first 4 primary feathers on the archer's left wing glowed briefly and snapped in half. Without his main flight feathers, the Pegasus couldn't stay in the air. He had enough control to lift and flounder to a soft landing, but our enemies had been reduced by 1. The others back-winged and shot another volley. Rarity cut another arrow out of the air, and the feathers of the severed end smacked me across the nose. Chestnut, a crew pony who had been helping rig anti-boarding netting, cried out, and I glanced at him to see a long shallow cut along his ribs, just beginning to bleed.
I'm sorry, but I'm tired of pussyfooting around with these ruffians,
Rarity said, sliding her blades back into their sheaths. The remaining archers were out of her magical range, but where her levitation left off, physics took over. She neatly flung a belaying pin straight into the forehead of one of the Pegasi with enough force to knock him cold. One of his companions dropped his bow and dove to catch the unconscious pony, leaving only one other, who hurriedly retreated to his ship. The damaged airship slipped further behind and yawed to one side to allow the untouched third vessel to come alongside of her. There was movement on deck, and their captains held the shouted conversation that we couldn't quite make out. The Pegasi from the crippled ship took to the air and moved to flanking positions high and on each side of us. They were carrying long sections of what appeared to be iron chain with many hooks attached. Evidently, they had a way to deal with magically strong opponents. That was definitely not good.
Captain?
Cat stood on my left, holding the little box from my cabin in her mouth. She could have levitated it, but was being understandably cautious with the little "don't ever touch it" item. I nodded to the deck and Cat set it down. This presented me with another problem, as the box was magically locked and protected. The mechanism of the lock was an intricate matrix of somatic nodes based on prime numbers that would be impossible to figure out for a unicorn without the key value and a knowledge of higher mathematics, but which I could calculate and manipulate in my sleep. It just needed a touch of magic. Magic which I didn't have at the moment.
Mr. Fairlead!
I shouted over the quarterdeck rail. My first mate looked up from the main deck, where he was levitating the heavy booms for the anti-boarding netting into place.
Captain?
He was a strong stallion with strong magic. He had proven himself to be a dependable and unflappable officer, and I still hesitated to ask him for what I needed.
Captain?
I
leaned over the rail and lowered my voice. Fairlead took the hint and moved to just below me.
I'm going to ask you for something. Ask Mr. Fairlead. This is not an order, and if you refuse, I will understand completely.
He nodded briefly.
Aye, Captain.
I took a deep breath.
I need to take your magic for just a little while. You weren't in Equestria when Tarek went on his rampage, so you don't know what it's like. But I assure you, it isn't pleasant.
His eyes widened and he took a half step backwards.
You can do that, ma'am.
I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. I glanced astern to where the attack ship was closing fast. His mouth went tight, and then he gave a nod of his own. It was ugly. There are some things that should never be done. And I felt a deep uneasiness as I watched the color fade from Fairlead's eyes and the cutie mark fade from his thigh. But it was something that had to be done. I unlocked the box as quickly as I could and then slipped the talisman over my head. I shuddered with the sudden rush of magical power, then vaulted over the quarterdeck rail and dropped to the main deck beside the slumped form of my first mate. I held up his muzzle with a hoof and breathed out his power. I waited until he had scrambled to his hoofs while trying to avoid looking at his horrified expression, and then returned to the quarterdeck. The enemy Pegasi were out of sight above Nebula's envelope, but with my new magical strength it was easy to detect them. They were far to each side and gaining altitude in an effort to make sure they were out of telekinesis range before they unleashed whatever nasty tactics they were up to. Well, they weren't out of my range. I duplicated Rarity's little trick on a grander scale. The first thing the rest of the crew ponies knew of it were the surprised and anguished cries of the enemy Pegasi. Next, they saw the long hooked chains dropping to either side of us, followed seconds later by cursing and screaming ponies, thrashing useless wings as they shed gear and floundered in the grip of remorseless gravity. I spared a moment to laugh at the sight, then turned my attention to the airships.
Now?
I could feel myself grinning as I walked to the stern rail. Crew ponies hurriedly got out of my way. The first bolt of magic hit the airship with a crippled fin. I'd aimed it to take out the forward gas cell just above the long blade at the bow, but the skin of the envelope lit up and crackled, dispersing the energy of the shot. It seemed the Zebra Sultan could afford talented magical artificers. For his military, at least.
Oh, it's going to be like that, is it?
I snarled. I fired 3 more blasts in quick succession. Each hit and dispersed, but I could sense the energy retained by the fine enchantment mesh that covered the ship's outer skin. A dozen or so more shots would be enough to heat it to the point where it would fail or set fire to the fabric it was supposed to protect.
If you want to burn, so be it!
I flung 5 more blasts into the ship's defenses before a hoof slammed into my chest.
Just what in tarnation are you doing, Twilight?
I looked down. Applejack had a hoof planted solidly on my chest. I raised the leg to slap it away and then paused. The enemy ship was smoldering and turning away, frantically maneuvering to escape. If it had caught fire, every pony aboard that wasn't able to fly would have died horribly. Oh, sweet Celestia, what had I been doing? Fighting the enemy, destroying the ponies that would have killed me and my friends without a thought. They deserved to die. Who would mourn the loss of mere peasants? Who cared for such lowly... The hoof caught me across the face, and Applejack shoved her muzzle right against mine.
Twilight, what's wrong with you?
Her voice was angry, but there was a tremble in it. And I realized with horror that my friend was afraid of me. I frantically glanced around and saw that I was the center of a circle of terrified ponies. Before I could think, before my thoughts could turn back to the cold, remorseless track they wanted to follow, I lowered my head and scraped the talisman off of my neck with a hoof. I dropped like a wind-broken tree branch. I couldn't even turn my head, but I heard AJ snapping out orders.
No, don't touch that cussed thing. Any of y'all got a sticker? Yeah, a magling spike will do. Just scoop it up and drop it back in that there box. Be careful.
A moment later, I felt a nudge at my ribs.
Twa, can you get up?
No.
I gasped weakly.
Too stupid to stand.
Strong hoofs circled my barrel and I was dragged behind the binnacle and dropped next to Rainbow Dash.
You just rest, Twilight. We'll take care of it.
Dash started to get up, but I asked her to stay.
You can't do anything until they board us. If you could keep me filled in on what's happening, I'd appreciate it.
I wheezed. She sighed but said,
Sure, Twilight.
And looked sternward.
The last one is coming up fast. Couple of unicorns are doing something with her engines. I think they're gonna ram us. Try to stick us with that long blade mounted at the bow, you know? There's zebras on deck with little catapults, loading them with pots of green, steamy gunk. This doesn't look good, Twi. You sure you don't have any oomph left?
I didn't have enough oomph to turn my head. All I could see was the onrushing peaks of the Dragon's Teeth. We were nearly there, and it was amazing how much the mountains looked like actual fangs. In fact, they looked exactly like dragon dentition. Exactly.
Fluttershy!
I gasped out.
I'm kinda busy now, Twilight. This is important.
I took as deep a breath as I could and tried to get my instructions out all in one rush.
Once we clear the first peak to starboard, turn us hard right and keep us as much speed as you can. You'll have about 2 furlongs of narrow canyon and then you'll need to take a hard left, just opposite the jagged outcrops that will be to your right. You won't see it, but there's an opening there. How do you know that?
Rainbow Dash put in. It was good timing on her part, because it gave me time to get my breath back. I grinned.
Spike sleeps with his mouth open.
Before she could ask the obvious question, I continued to Fluttershy.
After you make that turn, you'll have half a furlong to get us another 500 feet of altitude, or we'll smack into a sheer cliff. Hopefully the zebras won't be as good at piloting as you are. Are you sure?
I wasn't. The shape and the name of the mountains could have been sheer coincidence, but I didn't believe in coincidences of that magnitude. And there was nothing left that would help us unless I wanted to risk going full Nightmare Twilight. And I didn't. Not even if my friends would let me.
Absolutely sure,
I said.
Oh, okay.
Fluttershy swallowed and then bellowed out.
Every pony hang on to something.
Applejack heard her and repeated the command loudly enough that the crew could hear it. Then things got exciting. Rainbow Dash hooked one foreleg through the railing and grabbed me around the barrel with the other. We slid a bit as Nebula heeled over before her hull swung with the first turn, but Dash's grip kept us more or less in one place. There was some quiet but heartfelt swearing from the crew as our portal lateral fin scraped the granite, but it turned to cheers as they saw the wild yaw of the pursuing ship as she tried to keep up with us.
She's not going to make it!
Shouted one overeager crew pony. He was almost right. The attack ship scraped the mountainside with her port elevator in almost the same place we had hit, then overcompensated and rammed the long blade on her nose into the opposite side of the canyon. A cheer went up from Nebula's crew, but it trailed off when the whole blade structure dropped off of the attacker's nose cone, and the ship swung back on course once again. The blade had been built to be easily discarded if it was damaged, or wedged in an enemy vessel, I suppose. They closed fast, and arrows began arcing towards us. Then one of the catapults fired. If Fairlead hadn't deflected it with his magic, the smoldering pot of burnt green goo would have burst on the quarterdeck. When it hit the granite below us, there was a violent hissing and a black oily smoke billowed up into the air. 5 more catapults readied their shots, looking to overwhelm our ability to deflect them. I had just managed to raise my head to see how far we had to go until the blind canyon when Fluttershy yelled for every pony to hang on again. I was half rolled over by the inertia of the maneuver and cracked my horn and the side of my head against the binnacle. By the time my head cleared, we were in the shadow of the narrow walls of rock and there were unpleasant scrapings and grinding noises coming from all around me. But the sounds from aft of us were worse. We were close enough to hear the cursing of the zebra officers, the dreadful, prolonged crackling of skeletal spars, and the sharp hiss of tearing fabric as their ship slammed the side of her envelope against the jagged rocks. We'd done it. Our last pursuer was too damaged to continue the chase. I had about a second to start to relax when the pony on watch in the bow screamed,
Mountain! Mountain dead ahead!
The dead ahead of the canyon was a bit closer than my rough estimate predicted. Okay, a lot closer. Fluttershy screamed. It was a weird, quiet sort of scream. A high, nearly ultrasonic hee of terror that went on and on. Fortunately, Fluttershy could scream and fly at the same time. Her hoofs flew over the ballast controls in a yellow blur and then pounded down on the big release levers. There was a hollow boom as all 6 emergency dump valves slammed open and then the roar of tons of waters falling into open air. Then Nebula's deck leaped upward and I slipped and hit my horn hard against the quarterdeck rail. There was an ugly cracking sound and everything went black. Hello and thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit that like button down below since it really helps me out in the YouTube algorithm. And if you haven't already, why not subscribe to my channel? If you want to support the channel and all the content that I create, you can do so via Patreon at patreon.com/visualpony. The link is in the description. If you want more of my content, why not visit my website where I have everything organized into neat little categories. The address is visualpony.de. Here you can find all the information about upcoming releases and stories that are still in production. And now I'm signing off, my lovely viewers. Visual Pony,